Hi, and welcome back to this week's Parsha Shir on Sefer Maayan Beit Hashoeva. This week's Parsha of Tetze has the most mitzvahs of any Parsha in the Torah, 74 mitzvahs, and so there's much to talk about and many commentaries here by Rav Schwab, but I wanted to comment on two particular mitzvahs with a slightly different context here, one from the beginning of the Parsha and one from the end. Towards the beginning of the Parsha, I think in second or third aliyah, Torah speaks about the mitzvah of makeh, making guardrail around the roof of your house. Torah says, Ki sivne bayis chadash, when you build a new home, v'asisa ma'akeh legagecha, you should make a guardrail around your roof, v'lo tasim damim b'beisecha, and therefore you should not have blood in your home, ki yipol hanofel mimenu, when a person falls off the roof. A person should guard the roof so that no one falls off, and no one should be liable for that kind of tragedy occurring in their home. One has to secure their roof. Many questions about this pasuk, about this mitzvah, fascinating construct over here for another time. But Rav Schwab hones in on one particular halachic question having to do with this pasuk. Hine a Rambam Perik Yud Aleph Mehilchos Brachos. The Rambam in the 11th parak of the laws of brachos says, "V'lama ein mevarchim al netilas yadayim ba'achrona mipnei shelo chivu b'davar zeh elo mipnei hasakana." Why isn't there a bracha on the washing of mayim achronim? Many people today don't wash mayim achronim, but according to the Gemara, it's an obligation to wash before you bench at the end of the meal, called mayim achronim. Some people still do it today. Some people still do it on Shabbos today to uphold that custom. And there's a whole analysis of why we don't do that today, starting with the Tosfos in the Gemara and other Rishonim as well. But the Rambam raises a question: in a time when you would be washing for mayim achronim, why is it that there's no bracha before that washing? There's a bracha before the washing we do al netilas yadayim before the meal. Why isn't there a bracha on the washing after the meal? And he says because the whole reason for the mitzvah is very clear, is because of sakana, because of danger. And when you have a mitzvah that is instituted, according in this case by the rabbis, in terms of mayim achronim, only because of danger, not for some higher, lofty spiritual purpose, but only to prevent the person from coming to danger, there's no bracha on such a mitzvah. Brachos are said on mitzvahs that are part of that lofty spiritual pursuit, but not a mitzvah the Chazal put in place simply to protect us in the physical realm. Devarim shem mishum sakana ein mevarchin aleim, says the Rambam. V'im kain b'makeh haya makom lomar kevan shelachora kol hamitzvah hi mishum shelo yipol hanofel lo yevarich. So one might have argued the same for the mitzvah of makeh. Based on the way the pasuk describes the mitzvah, it seems to just be a preventative measure to prevent someone from falling off the roof and coming to their tragic end. It's to prevent sakana, just like mayim achronim, and therefore one would have imagined that this is the kind of mitzvah over which there would be no blessing, no bracha instituted by Chazal. V'chein lefitam harashba b'tshuva. The Rashba in a tshuva also writes, she'in mevarchin al kibud aveim, she'in nikar b'asiyasa, she'in mishum hamitzvah. So too, you would also say another reason for not saying a bracha on the mitzvah of putting up a guardrail. First, according to the Rambam, because you don't say a bracha on a mitzvah is purely to prevent sakana, danger. And secondly, according to the Tshuvas Harashba, in the case of the mitzvah of kibud aveim, there's no bracha upon that mitzvah because it's not necessarily recognizable. When you do acts of kindness or obedience towards your parents, that you're doing it for the sake of a mitzvah. It's what every child does in the world to their parent, not necessarily because they're obligated from the Torah, but because that's the mannerism of the way people behave in the world. So it wouldn't be nikar, it wouldn't be recognizable. So it's hard to say a bracha on an act that's not recognizably for the sake of a mitzvah. Huadin, so we might argue here, says Rav Schwab, the same thing over here, in addition to the fact that makeh is mishum sakana. So according to the Rambam, there would be no bracha. Also, makeh is something that's not so recognizable that it's for the sake of the mitzvah. So according to the Rashba, you'd also not say a bracha upon it because people build guardrails around the roofs of their house. They don't want people to fall off. Even if we weren't commanded to do it, we might do it anyways. Now, the fact that we were commanded means that we do it because we're obeying the laws of Hashem, not because we think it's a nice thing to do. But were it not for that, we might have done it anyways, in which case doing it for the sake of the mitzvah is not necessarily recognizable. It's not recognizable. So all of that would dictate no bracha on the mitzvah of makeh. The problem is, you look in the Rambam, in Halacha Ches, Halachos Brachos, the Rambam paskin she'ha'oseh makeh mevarech b'shas asiyah the Rambam says that we do say a bracha on the mitzvah of makeh. So how could it be that the Rama on the one hand paskins that you don't say a bracha on a mitzvah that's purely to prevent sakana, and on the other hand he says you do make a bracha on the mitzvah of makeh, when seemingly from the pasuk the only reason to put up a makeh is to prevent danger. V'nireh, it would seem, he says, that here's the following answer to this halachic conundrum, this question on the Rambam. Sha'ayin besifrei. If you look in the Sifrei, the Medrash Sifrei, Mishas chidusho asa lo makeh. V'hainu midahakdima haTorah kisivne ba'is chadash hayadai betzivui v'asisa makeh legagecha ela shemelamdenu hakasuv shemiyad b'shas chidush shel ha'ba'is mischayev b'makeh af kodem sheyad dorsha. The question on the language of the pasuk, says the Sifrei, why does it say kisivne ba'is chadash asisa makeh legagecha? When you build a new home, you're obligated to put up a makeh. In fact, the halach is you always have to put up a makeh, whether it's a new home or not. What does ba'is chadash teach us? The language of the pasuk teaching us that upon a new home you would put up a makeh. What is that teaching us? So Schwab says here, based on that medrash, that maybe it teaches the halacha that as soon as the ba'is is chadash, as soon as the house is new, it's obligated in a makeh, whether or not you moved into the house, whether or not there's anybody living there, whether or not there's anybody going up on the roof. The very fact that the house is built means that the mitzvah of makeh kicks in. The loke mitzvah mezuzah, as opposed to mitzvah mezuzah, for example, shechovas hadar, einu mechuyev ad sheyidur b'bayis. The mitzvah mezuzah is also a household mitzvah, like makeh, but the mitzvah mezuzah is a chovas hadar. It's a mitzvah upon those living in the home. So if you have a home that you built somewhere and you haven't moved in yet, you don't have to put up mezuzahs. When you move in, you have to put up the mezuzah. Masha'en kain, that's not the case by the mitzvah of makeh. The pasuk ba'is chadash teaches us that the makeh goes up on the ba'is chadash whether or not you're living there. It's unconnected to the chovas hadar. It's unconnected to the one living there, and more connected to the house being built. If that's true, says Rav Schwab, im ken shechiyuv af kodem shemagia matzav sheyuchol lios sakana. Arei muchach she'ein hamitzvah inyan minias sakana levad, v'gam muchach she'asiyas hamakeh l'shem mitzvah shapir mevarech. If that's true, based on this pasuk and the Sifrei, that the halacha is you have to put up a makeh before anybody moves in, then it's absolutely clear, both in the theoretical realm and the practical realm in terms of being recognized, that this is a mitzvah that's not solely to prevent danger. There's some reason for the mitzvah of makeh, according to the Torah, Hashem's logic, which we'll never necessarily know, but in a lofty reason for why every house has to have a makeh, whether there's people living there, whether there's people in danger or not. It's not just mishum sakana. And when you put up a makeh when the house is new, before anybody else moves in, it's absolutely recognizable that it's not because of danger, because after all, there's no one living there yet. 6 months out, you don't need a makeh now, but you put up a makeh anyways. And that, therefore, explains why the Rambam can paskin that it requires a bracha before putting up the makeh, because it's not just mishum sakana, and therefore we understand the difference between the mitzvah on the one hand of netilas yadayim mayim achronim, where there is no bracha because the mitzvah is only mishum sakana, and the mitzvah of makeh, where the Rambam paskins there is a bracha, because even though the pasuk makes it sound like it's only mishum sakana, in actuality it's indicated to us in the pasuk that it's not just mishum sakana, ki yipol hanofel mimenu, but because of ba'is chadash, because of the fact that we put it up even when the house is empty, without any inhabitants, away from any people, it indicates it's not just because of sakana. Fascinating answer from our pasuk to the halachic stira in the Rambam. Okay, now a comment of a different sort on a totally different kind of mitzvah towards the end of the parsha. The end of the parsha, the Torah tells us about the mitzvah of having even weights and measures, and appropriate weights and measures. The pasuk says here, Even shlema vatzedek yelach, Efa shlema vatzedek yelach, Leman ya'arichu yamecha al ha'adama asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lach. One is supposed to have a perfect and correct weights and perfect and correct measures in their home, and if you do so, your days will be lengthened on this earth. Fascinating mitzvah, a mitzvah that is definitely important moral undertones and moral implications for us as a people and for us as individuals. Anybody who does trickery of this sort, who mixes up the weights and measures in order to cheat their customers, is an abomination in the eyes of God. That's the end of that mitzvah, the mitzvah of proper weights and measures. Very next pasuk goes to another mitzvah. Zachoras asher asalacha Amalek baderech b'tzeichem mimitzrayim. You should remember what Amalek did to you upon leaving Egypt. This is the passage we read for the mitzvah of Zachor, the mitzvah of Zachiras Amalek, of remembering that which Amalek did. So Rashi has a comment here on the juxtaposition of these two mitzvahs, even weights and measures, and the attack of Amalek, or remembering the attack of Amalek. Rashi says, Im shakarta b'midos, if you lied with your weights and your measures, meaning if you tricked people with your weights and measures, havidoeg migirui ha'oyev, you should be worried about the attack of your enemy. The juxtaposition of these two mitzvahs means that there's a connection between them. Somehow in the heavenly realm, there's a correlation between you cheating in weights and measures and eventually being attacked by your enemies, which is why these two mitzvahs are next to each other. It's further seen from the beginning of Perek Yud Aleph in Mishlei. The first pasuk in Perek Yud Aleph of Mishlei says, Moznei mirma to'avas Hashem, that faulty weights and measures are an abomination of God, reflecting exactly the logic of our pasuk, the language of our pasuk. The very next pasuk says, Ba zadon vayavo kalon. Your enemy comes and it is shameful, says the pasuk in Mishlei in Proverbs. So you see again juxtaposed even weights and measures and the coming of the enemy. And in the Torah, the proper fulfillment of weights and measures and remembering our enemy. So the two concepts are linked both in our Parsha and in Mishlei. So what is the reason for this link? So he says here, Ulam b'parshas b'shalach, something is strange here, because here the coming of our enemy, the coming of Amalek, seems to be attributed to faulty weights and measures, to improper moral behavior in terms of bein adam lechavero, interpersonally. But Parshas B'Shalach, when you come to the passage of the war with Amalek, Mevuar Sheba Amalek al Nasos Bnei Yisrael Hashem Leimor Hayeshem B'Kirbeinu Maayan. Over in Parshas B'Shalach, it blames the attack of Amalek on our weakness of faith, not our weakness of behavior in moral realms or in interpersonal realms, but the weakness of our faith in God. We came to test God, we came to question God, and because of that, we were attacked by Amalek. We have to figure out why over here, according to Rashi in our Parsha, the coming of Amalek happens because of faulty weights and measures, and in B'Shalach, the pasuk seems to indicate that Amalek comes because of faulty faith in God. So the Rosh Schwab answers with a beautiful idea. V'nira sheshneim inin echad. The truth of the matter is, the attack of our enemy coming from both these sources is actually the same thing. Faulty weights and measures and tricking your fellow human beings and having lack of faith in God actually comes from the exact same source. She'elas b'nei Yisrael yesh Hashem b'kirbeinu, hainu inyan hatalas dofi b'ashkacha haprati shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Yisrael. When Jewish people question their faith in God, question the existence of God in Parshas B'Shalach, what they're really questioning is whether Hashem has an involvement in this world, the hashkacha pratis. Shelo ha'aminu shetamid ani beinchem uzuman l'chol tzarchechem. According to Rashi over there, it means that the Bnei Yisrael were doubting whether Hashem is always ready for them and available to them and acting consciously in the world. That ability to not see that God is involved in the world, that ability to be kofar, to reject the concept of hashgacha pratis, of God's constant involvement and watching in the world, can easily lead down a road to the sin of Moznei Mirma, to the sin of improper weights and measures, which we see in our Parsha. Shim haya ha'adam ma'amin b'ashkacha so yisparach she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu zan mefarnes l'chol v'hu hu haroa sheli ha'mechusar l'yireyav v'chol mezon nosav kitzuvim lo ha'adam ach v'rak kefi retzono yisparach as lo haya adam mevakish eitzos v'tachbulo shonas laharbos hon. Person had proper faith in God, and hashkachas Hashem, that everything in the world is watched by God and appropriately dispensed by God, then one would imagine that the money that they have in the world is not theirs because they had great chachma in achieving it, but because HaKadosh Baruch Hu provided it to them. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you believe, is the one that provides the sum of money you'll have at the end of the year, then you don't have to go to all these tricks and measures and faulty weights and measures and trickery and thievery in order to achieve more money, because you would have enough faith in God that if it doesn't come today, it'll come tomorrow. And I don't need to trick my fellow man in order to get more money, when really my income comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, through my own efforts, but in the sum total of what is quote-unquote deserving to you from the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's all set by HaKadosh Baruch Hu based on what he decides and not what you do to trick other people. So truthfully, the trickery in terms of weights and measures is also a lack of faith in Hashem, in God's ability to provide for you and in his involvement in the world. And therefore, the response to both, in our Parsha, the faulty weights and measures, and in Parshas Bishalach, the lack of faith in God, is the same thing. Amalek comes because of the very same thing, lack of faith in God. In Bishalach, it manifests in a direct manner. We said, is God really here to protect us? We don't believe in God. And in our Parsha, it comes in an indirect manner, that our lack of faith in God led us to have practical actions in this world to take care of ourselves because we don't believe God is going to take care of us, like having faulty weights and measures, and ultimately comes to the same point of the attack of our enemies and the shameful consequences in this world. We should all believe in Hashgachas Hashem. We should all build up our Hashgachas Hashem, as difficult as that might be to do, believing that our HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very much involved in the world, is concerned with the world, is concerned with our behavior, bein latov, bein lara, and is ultimately one that makes us accountable for all of our deeds. A very appropriate message for this Elul and this lead up to Rosh Hashanah. Shabbat Shalom.